Move to the next presentation, and a next presentation by David Peris Isaac from India, and it's called Anticipatory Failures Analysis to Identify Hidden Risk to Business Continuity. Okay, David, please, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, dear Valerie. Good evening, good afternoon, all participants. Thank you so much. I'll just share my screen and we'll just get started. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. So the topic I'll deal with today is anticipatory failures analysis to identify hidden risk to business continuity. I'm trying to apply some of the techniques on business analysis and really figure out, what are these hidden risks. And we'll just set the context. My name is David Peris Isaac, co-founder of IRIS Training and Consulting. And we will look at what are the current challenges that today's businesses face, in terms of business continuity as such. So point one is they are under constant pressure for growth, for profit. And added to this, we are complicating life with also expectations on sustainability, digital transformation, employee focus, and so many others. Especially for high net worth individual owned businesses, business continuity and keeping the business within the family is also a very important aspect as such. There are multiple stakeholders, especially for HNI businesses, with different motives, priorities, which need to be taken care of. And also there has to be a healthy relationship between the board, the individual members, and the management. So there are these three entities which go hand in hand, and they have to be in complete balance for the business to be successful and to be there for a longer period of time. Very important, and that's where we will focus on primarily, is when there is a transfer of ownership or there is well transition to be needed to be done between owners, between members, then it has to lead to least amount of disruptions. So it should not impact the business profitability or the business functioning as such. So that becomes a key challenge. And as such, even now, there are a lot of new challenges which are emerging. So these were the earlier challenges. Things are getting complex further. We have VUCA, and also we have BANI coming in. Things are getting brittle. People are getting anxious. Things are getting non-linear. Also items are getting incomprehensible. We are not able to make sense of so many different items coming together. Complexity in managing businesses is also increasing manifold. It's jumping up. Interference from government, macroeconomic forces, political changes are happening at higher pace. And we know, because of multiple situations that we are facing, that the governments are also getting protective and very, very powerful in many of the countries. There is also a need to identify risk on a proactive basis so that we are better prepared. So more than ever, the need now is, how do we identify these risk events beforehand so that we are prepared in advance, and we have a good starting position, if I may say so. The challenge is that our current methods that we look at when we identify risk, which we would typically use an FMEA or a fault tree or an event tree, data modeling and other techniques, are all based on past experiences. In today's world, these past experiences are important, but of course we need to proactively, look at new experiences as they really emerge. So that's become very important for us. And the existing standard processes for transition, business continuity planning are all based on the best practices which we have, which in itself may create some kind of a barrier or a blind spot in many of the conditions, right? So you would really have, that these kind of situations really coming up in a new way. So the whole need now is how do we really proactively identify these new events or risk events. So I am typically experimenting with a merger of TRIZ techniques along with design thinking in different areas so that it becomes easier for the clients or team members of organizations to really absorb elements. So step number one, using a design thinking technique here on how might we, so basically a question on the future. So framed a how might we statement. How might we proactively identify all probable risk events and manage them so that smooth transitioning and business continuity is ensured despite dynamic changes happening in the ecosystem on a continuous basis. So how do we really go about doing this? And you see there are these critical inflection points on so that and despite certain constraints. So how might we itself builds the contradiction in some way, helps us to really define some constraints within which it should really come in. Here we are using, and this is an experiment and an application that I did for a client and multiple clients that I work with, used anticipatory failure analysis to really figure out and proactively understand the various risk elements beforehand, before they could really emerge. The main concept, just for our understanding and just a very basic one, and using Valery Suchkov's training material and of course the guidance that he has. The main concept here is the potential failure can occur as a result of unforeseen and undesired, that are negative effects produced by a combination of function and resources under specific conditions. So we are really trying to figure out is a failure in itself is a combination of three elements put together: the function, the resource, and the conditions. Now, if you are able to really understand the function and the resources and under which conditions they apply, you would be able to really predict or in advance at least appreciate certain kind of failures that would occur. So at a basic starting position, this remains the fundamental idea as such that we start building. And these are the multiple steps as we go through. Again, I'm building up on Valery's structure and just a few tweaks to add on elements. So we start with the how might we statement, which is from the stakeholders view. Now the stakeholder in this case are the owners or the top leadership who essentially are interested in this business continuity to be really happening. So we frame the how might we. Then we select the system to identify and also identify the subsystem and the super system elements like we normally do. So we figure this up. Step 3, build a functional model to understand interactions among these various elements in the system by itself. And step number 4, very critical one, is to check on how the combination of function and resource will create a failure. So we try and start thinking that how do we use the resources and the elements which are in the super system or the subsystem to now really deliberately create a failure into a particular function that is happening. In this case could be wealth transfer or transition of power or movement within board members in certain way. Step number 5 is to rank potential failures, looking at certain criteria. And in this case, step number 6 is where I experimented with design thinking here, is not to look at a failure in isolation, but to combine these elements of failure points or expected failures into scenarios, because they get very conducive. We are able to see the picture in a larger frame because we then try and combine 2-3 failure points to get a holistic picture on what could happen if we combine these individual failures. And then we prioritize the scenario risk for risk management and then create ideas and other elements. But I'll take you to the presentation till step number 6, where we look at how do we integrate the failures and create the various scenarios. So we have already identified our how might we statement, come to step number 2. And here is the system, subsystem, supersystem. So selected stage, because it has to be with a certain frame or a situation. The selected stage is business and wealth transfer is wanting to happen between stakeholders, and basically they could be HNI individuals who are owners. And I'm using a combination of our system, subsystem element, and creating what is also called in design thinking a stakeholder map. So you have the primary stakeholders, which essentially is the subsystem, which composes of owners. So there are 3 owners. Then there are owner families, the families of the owners who are involved. You have subject matter experts who are guiding, mentors who are guiding the owners and coaching them to move the ladder in a way. There are friends of these owners, family office, which takes care of the needs of the individuals and the group as a whole, board of directors, which are very, very close to the key owners. So they are part of the subsystem in a way. And in the super system, we have multiple other entities. We have governments, regulator, company secretary, bankers, CFO. And these are, of course, there are so many, but related to the selected stage, we restricted to certain key specific ones. So this is step number 2, where we looked at identifying the elements of the subsystem and the super system, and then started looking at creating a functional analysis on the useful functions in terms of how elements within the super system and the subsystem are interacting with each other. And as you see, many of the lines of useful function are towards the owner, the primary owner and the secondary owners as such. You have friends who share views. There are family members who influence the owners in some way, SMEs, subject matter experts who guides people. There are elements of mentor who guides the owners in large number of ways. You have family office that supports the need. And of course, there are these government elements who formulate laws, regulators who control various policies which get fed to the family office. Then you have the business side of it, the business management. Of course, owners are also participating in the business process. So they are guiding and leading the management team in terms of various actions. So you have the CFO who informs status about the current financial conditions to the business management team. And one of the elements would also be of, so you have board of directors who are able to interpret regulatory requirements and other pieces, feed it back to the owners in a way. Family office that looks at, how do we really give maximum benefit, looking at the constraints and laws and guidelines which are posed in the particular country. So this gave us a view on various useful functions. And we looked at how these interactions really happen. And you see, a lot of these interactions are with owner number 1 and the primary owners, because a lot of these are key people, and transfer of wealth, transfer of ownership, or transitioning and business continuity becomes a very important aspect in this piece up. Now we go to step number 4, where we are trying to figure out the potential failures. We don't know the potential failures, but we are trying to figure out the potential failures by asking this question on how to disrupt the function or how to make it go wrong using the resources which are available, or available in the subsystem, in the super system also. So which identifies the failure function. So we try and now build this whole logic is how do we use the resources available to really disrupt the useful functions. And we had a cross-functional team who understands the whole business and the way the organization functions in a way. And we looked at each function and try to figure out is, how do we disrupt this using resources which are available. So you could have sudden changes in government policies. And here is a list. It's not a complete list as such. Of course, I cannot share the entire list, but we identified around 21 such potential failures, some of which were related to sudden change in government policy that prevents transfer of ownership under certain conditions. SMEs could provide wrong advice to key stakeholders, which could misguide them in a certain direction. Owners, stakeholders may borrow or pledge their current, share or the current ownership that could disrupt certain kind of elements. Wrong advice from family and friends. You could have an incident of a sad demise of an owner with no robust structure in place. Now that would really damage the stability, or unless you have proper planning or succession planning and business continuity planning and well transfer into position. Mentor influencing key owners to create a rift or a fight between key members. Board of the company acts as a hurdle on transfer of ownership. So these were some of the potential failures which the team could detect using the resources that were available. And we went to step number 5, where we kept it a little simple at the moment. We used 2 rating criteria to assess these various potential failures. One is in terms of the severity of disruption. How severe would this be to business continuity, to the main objectives that we are trying to address? And also look at the occurrence. What is the probability of estimated? Now there's no objective way of doing it. It's an estimation of the people who are within the entity and looked at it, and created kind of a heat map which gave us which are those elements which are events which are of very high or a higher probability comparatively and of a higher severity impact. So that gave us some areas for us to really work with. From the 21 list that we had, we prioritized the top 10, 12. What we did a step ahead is to really experiment that. And the whole thinking here is that an event by itself, if you mitigate, you could really do that in certain ways by creating structures, policies, and systems. But of more interest was that what if the failures got combined with each other or happened simultaneously at the same moment? Now the impact would be very high in certain conditions. So the team then started, and we used the design thinking principle of scenario creation and identification by looking at what are those probable combinations that are near to reality in a way, which if they come together would have, of course, it is a very low probability of element, but when they come together, it may become so very dramatic for anybody to really plan. And we have a history of such events occurring in the past for multiple, such HNI held organizations where these scenarios emerge, and these scenarios are composing multiple sub-elements, disruptions put together in a way. So what if, a sad demise of a stakeholder with no structure in place and an unintentional wrong advice by SME. So if we combine these put together, then we have a dramatic effect in a way. Or a mentor influencing the future stakeholder, creating a rift between 2 or 1 of the future stakeholders. And the stakeholders put a condition that to become a stakeholder, they put some conditions that they would want to have, which defeats the purpose of business continuity in a way. So we created multiple such scenarios, combining various failure modes. In fact, some 15 such scenarios we could really identify, and then evaluated them in terms of it's again a heat map and an evaluation that helped us to identify which are those scenarios we should really address. Now that's where the team then took a call that yes, these are the scenarios we should address, and these are certain actions and other elements. Of course, that went up into various other teams from legal and from board of directors and other element who took part in creating systems for it in a way. And we are in the entire journey as such. So we created these scenarios and some learnings as we were implementing these ideas and applications. At least I could sense that, combination of TRIZ design thinking methods assist in getting higher engagement from client teams. It becomes lighter for them. AFA identified blind spots and current risk currently not addressed by the client at the moment, which was not covered in a way. AFA can be applied for different stages of the system. Here we were looking at business continuity and wealth transfer and others. It could be for different areas also. Integrating potential failures into scenarios help identify complex situations which have got very low probability of occurrence, but can cripple the main objective, that we set out to. This was an example of AFA application that I wanted to share with all of you. Thanks so much from IRIS Training and Consulting. Any questions?
Okay, David, thanks a lot for your presentation. I noticed the change that you made in the original AFA, especially at steps when you apply design thinking to combine potential failures to scenarios. Yes, and yes, you're right that two, let's say, small impact failures coming together can create a big impact failure. That's correct. Okay, and there are questions from Hans-Gerd Grabe. How are the relationships between different system levels handled in such a model?
Could you just elaborate? Maybe Hans, could you just elaborate further if I can respond better?
Because normally there is no difference. You take the subsystem or system. It's still the same failure.
You had a slide where you had the three different system levels: subsystem, system, and super system. And on this slide, you had several arrows that that pointed from the super system into the system and so on. But if you do system analysis, you usually analyze functionality or such things only within a specific system level. So my question was just how do you manage to work with these arrows? So you have a so all these three, the subsystem, system, and super system, are for you one big system, or how do you manage this?
Yeah, excellent. So it depends on the scope. So what you define as your initial system and what's the challenge you're trying to solve. In this case, we were trying to solve the business continuity and transition of wealth as a key element. So having defined that area to focus on, then it was easier to detect that the main owners and the key people with whom they come in contact with on a regular basis become the key become the subsystem in a way. And all of the other elements which may not have direct impact on business continuity or wealth transfer and others are part of the super system. Like for example, there would be people in the management, CEO, or the technology officer or CTO or others who are there. Now, in context with the problem and the system that we define, the boundaries, in terms of what we are trying to solve, they become part of the super system.
And I would like to add that if there are functions following from super system towards system, these are very hard to manage because we cannot directly influence a super system and its behavior. However, if there are functions going from a system to super system, those we can manage. Yeah, so these are manageable functions. That's why it is important to have both system and super system functions in one picture to identify all the functions that impact the continuity of our business.
Yeah. But I was just such an example. Changing regulatory conditions. This was one of your failures, but this is just an arrow that goes from the super system to the system. So this is just such a difficult problem And one solution would be you should have in the system a monitoring of the things that are happening in the super system to really anticipate such regulatory changes and so on. So this means that you must have a certain structure within the system to really cope with the risks that are coming from Dutch super system. So this is more or less the core of my question, because you need for those relations that are going beyond the system, you need some things within the system that allow you to monitor at least such things also.
Absolutely, fully agree with you, and point taken that there are conditions where government policies directly impact. So you would have the family office, or you would have the company secretary and others trying to really monitor or even to some extent preempt certain moves that these agencies are trying to do in a way.
And that's why we need to model super system functions as well, because they produce a very sharp impact on continuity. For instance, many startups are failing because their competitors manage to come to the market with products faster. Also, they started together, and the startups, they just don't know about each other. Yeah, so this is completely unmanageable situation when there were seed investments, first round investments, second round investments, and finally the competitor comes up with a competitive product, which is still not ready at our startup. So we can close everything. With absolutely unpredictable situation, and to follow the situation is necessary to have continuous monitoring of what is happening. Without it, it's impossible. But this is a very strong impact on our business continuity. And without following it, we cannot do anything. That's right. That's why it is so important to include super system functions. Okay. There is a comment from Anton Kazimiaka. David, thank you very much for a detailed explanation how to anticipate failures in business systems and technical ones. Okay, ladies, gentlemen, more questions? Okay, I just want to comment that the method of IFA presented by David is a method very similar to anticipatory failure determinations, which is known in classical TRIZ, with little bit changes made by me, and now changes made by David, especially in the part of evaluating the design scenarios.